Hello my friends, and welcome back to the next installment of the Divide and Conquer version 5 faction overviews. This week we are focusing on the Ar-Adûnaim, and next week it will actually be Bree. I made a mistake and I forgot to put them in my list. I said Dale would be next after the Ar-Adûnaim, but it is actually the Men of Bree. So anyway, to go on with the Ar-Adûnaim, honestly, not much has changed for them outside of their roster. They have completely brand new visuals and unit cards for pretty much every single unit, minus the Corsair Raiders and the Corsair Archers. Those are unchanged, and the Gondor Mercs, of course, but those are now mercenary units, not something that you would regularly train anymore. Campaign-wise, they are pretty much exactly the same as they have been since at least version 4, if not even potentially before version 4. I can't quite remember if it was version 4 where they became a Horde faction or if it was even before that. I think version 4 is when it happened. But anyway, you will start off with 3 generals: Ar-Gimmelkad, your faction leader, Gimmelthon, one of your family members, and Lord Gimmelzor, your faction heir. Now these names might be familiar to you if you know your Second Age history. Ar-Gimmelzor was actually the 23rd king of Numenor and the grandfather of Ar-Pharazôn, the last king of Numenor, and Gimmelkad was actually his nephew. But these are not the same men from 2,000 years, almost 3,000 years actually now, given that it is the year 2980. These are not the same men, they are descendants, and the names were probably on purpose from, the previous teams and from Galu, whoever actually named them. I don't remember who actually gave them their names and picked them out, but they are not the same as the ancient kings of Numenor, rather their descendants. So anyway, when you start the faction, your army with Ar-Gimmelkad will actually have a random selection of Razadon Bowmen, Razadon Halberdiers, and Razadon Footmen, along with a guaranteed unit of Abrazanim Narduterik. Gimmelthon comes with Abrazanim Nardubawib, and Lord Gimmelzor comes with the Narduzagar, a great, fantastic unit, all of those. But the standard Razadon units are completely random, so you might get a bunch of bowmen, you might get a bunch of spearmen, or you might get an even mix here. So we got like 5 bows, 3 footmen, and 6 halberdiers. So that roster, it'll change up each time you start the campaign, so it's a little bit of variety, but it is the same composition of the same 3 units. So campaign-wise, nothing has really changed from version 4.6 or version 4. You are a Horde. You can go anywhere that you want. You do come with Admiral Sacklethor, and he can take your armies pretty far. Now, the range is misleading because naval ships can actually go really far, especially Sacklethor. He has probably the highest movement of any naval unit in the game. But once you load up a army into them, like if we throw Gimmelzor in there, the range is significantly reduced, so do keep that in mind. While Sacklethor himself can make it across the world pretty fast, he can make it up to Mithlond almost instantaneously, just a few turns of travel time. It will take your armies much longer if they are in the ships. Now, the traditional start, which is the start that I don't think many players actually do, is to take Umbar. If you take Umbar, there is a full garrison here, but they are just Haradrim Spearmen, Southron Pikemen. You can siege it out for a few turns, cripple the garrison, and your units are more than a match for them, though the walls may provide tough. I believe Umbar actually now has its own custom battle map, but I could be mistaken on that. I know Dol Amroth got one. I'm not certain if Umbar ever did, so my apologies if I am spreading false information. I've yet to actually fight a battle in Umbar in any of my version 5 campaigns. I don't go down this far usually. You also start with the Diplomat, Ziegler. You can send him wherever you want. The traditional start would be to be in Umbar, take Khaldun, take Ardenmere, and then from there it's, do you want to fight Harad or make an alliance with them? If you do ally with Harad, that allows you both to focus on the northern, well, not the northern Dúnedain, but the Dúnedain factions to your north, being Dol Amroth and Gondor. However, if you do fight against Harad, you can find a lot of wealth along the River Harnan here. A lot of these settlements have the capability to make a lot of money, and you would establish a very nice power base, but do keep in mind that would give Dol Amroth time to actually recuperate and send its forces down your way. as primarily you will be Dol Amroth's main and chief enemy along with Harad should you start over here. Alternatively, though, you can go anywhere you want. So if what I'm gonna do is actually give ratings of difficulty. These aren't like really methodized or anything. I didn't come up with like any evaluation matrix or anything, but I would recommend going anywhere along the coastlines in the west of the map, even up the Anduin River. This will give you probably a medium to medium hard start depending on where you go, as you will be in the heartlands of Gondor and Dol Amroth. Now, if you go straight to Dol Amroth, you actually might have a pretty straightforward campaign, taking their capital settlement, taking Ed Elend and Methras. That gives you a very nice and relatively safe power base, since you can kind of choke point Gondor's and Dol Amroth's forces across the mountains here, splitting up the region. And Gondor, while they will produce ships, they won't use all that many to send troops your way, so really it would just be defending the landmass. So I would say starting anywhere in Dol Amroth or Gondor would be probably like a medium to medium hard difficulty. Really depends on who you go for, like, depends, if you take Dol Amroth, you'll probably be okay for a while. If you decide to take, like, Anulond, I mean, you'll won't have to worry about many of Gondor's forces, but you won't find much money. Alternatively, you could go up to Minas Tirith or Pelargir. Pelargir is an interesting one. You're kind of up at the front lines against a lot of Gondor's forces, so I'd say Pelargir, very hard start, but can be worthwhile if you are able to hold on and survive. If you go up here to the Osgiliath or Caer Andros, just be wary of Mordor, depending on how you want to either ally with them or fight them. You are, of course, a completely neutral faction. A very popular start is to take your armies up to Tharbad and basically fight off the Wildman and the Northern Dunedain. Economically, it's a tough campaign. I did it on my channel a while back, and it's a hard one. It's kind of a grind because it takes a while to get your culture up in these regions, so for a while you'll just be relying on local mercenary conscription recruitment up until you can get your culture going, and then public order is very difficult to manage with the Ar-Adûnaim, just because of the fact that you don't have much culture, and it takes a while to spread, as you are the only Kingsman nation in the game. Other starts you could do, you could go up to Mithlond and take up the Elven Havens, though doing that would prevent you from getting a lot of human units, as you can only conscript human units from human nations. You don't get elves or dwarves, of course. And for the farthest possible naval route you could take would be to go into Angmar, though I don't believe there's many Angmar forces that you can get either as the Ar-Adûnaim. Alternatively, if you want to go to like Dale or go around the Sea of Rune, you can do that. I would just recommend staying along the coastlines if you can, wherever you go. If you walk your armies up to the Anduin Vale, stay along the waterways to get the most benefit. Really, if you go anywhere else, like if you were to start in Mirkwood, it would be probably not the funnest campaign, probably be quite difficult. But I'd have to rate the Tharbad Start or Londare Start quite difficult to do, though your starting army is pretty powerful. Replenishing your troops becomes the primary issue, as it takes many turns to get your culture up. So again, not too much has changed for the Ar-Adûnaim. They get level 5 armor, no building restrictions. You can build the highest tier of cities and the highest tier of strongholds. And aside from that, that's really it. I don't believe there's any unique buildings. There is the Black Haven in Umbar, a unique tier 4 port, which is very nice to have for your economy. I would say the easiest start for the Ar-Adûnaim would probably be starting in Umbar. You're very safe, you're in your own little corner of the world here, and it takes a while for Dol Amroth's ships to get to you, especially considering they cannot deploy any units around the cliffs over here. Instead, they must come all the way, I think, to the shores here at the Straits of the Harnan River, because it's just cliff everywhere else, so you can't land anywhere over here. There might be a beach landing right here, though it looks like the cliff is there. It's kind of hard to tell. But yeah, that is pretty much it for the Ar-Adûnaim on the campaign map. Really, the world is your oyster. Easier start would be in Umbar. Kind of a medium start, I would say, is like in Dol Amroth. Hard starts would be like Pelargir, Tharbad, going up to Mithlond, anywhere over there. And then pretty much hard anywhere else you really go. There's probably a case to be made about going to Rune. You could probably do okay here given the economy of the Sea of Rune, or going into Dorwinion, and you would be able to conscript their troops. I don't know of anyone who's actually done that. I don't think I've seen a campaign on YouTube of anyone who's played the Ar-Adûnaim that way. It would be interesting to see like a Karasant start, a Mistran start, or like a Dale slash Esgaroth start. But I don't know, if anyone has done that, comment with their link, and I'd be interested to check out how that went for them. But that is pretty much it for the campaign overview of the Ar-Adûnaim. Again, like I've said like 3 times now, not a whole lot has really changed. I guess I'll go into the bodyguards. Gimlethan has Baruthiel's Watch, same unit as before, but with the upgraded look. Gimlecod with the Naru and Aru Royal Guard, a very, very powerful spear unit, one of the best human spear units in the game. And Gimmelzora has the Ar-Adûnaim Armsman, a fantastic high attack, high defense sword and shield unit. I will now move it over to the battlefield, and we can look at all of the upgraded visuals. And here we are on the battle map side of things. So the way I've split it up this time with the Ar-Adûnaim is I have the trash over here, the melee infantry, the skirmishers, and the elite. So we're going to start off weakest units first, the Corsair Archers and the Corsair Raiders. Now, I'm not actually 100% certain. I believe you still can train these guys from, I believe, it's either the port building or it's probably the meeting hall. I think it's the meeting hall in coastal settlements, but you can also get them as mercenaries. Starting off with these Corsair Archers, a 2 melee attack, 2 missile, 3 charge, 4 defense archers. They are able to hide anywhere, which is a nice advantage, but they have a low amount of arrows at only 18, low accuracy, and okay range at 150. They're very lightly armored, so they do get a movement speed buff, but yeah, don't expect a lot from these guys. Expect them to run out of ammo, and at that point, the way I use these guys is I kind of use them as like a front line archer, so that they kind of take some of the arrow fire and they get in melee rather than my other archers. I kind of treat them the same as I would the Corsair Raiders. Now, these guys, they're actually not that bad. I mean, they've got pretty poor stats: 4 attack, 5 defense, 3 charge. Poor morale across both of their tiers. They do have the higher movement speed. You do get 202 of them. They can work at kind of just running towards enemy archer lines, I found. Usually works okay with them. And they can do okay as a flanking light infantry unit, but don't expect a lot from them. If they're in your front line, if they get shot by arrows, they will not last for long. But they are very cheap, and especially as a mercenary unit, it's good just to pick up 1 or 2, maybe have them use the battering rams to get in, push some siege towers or ladders to the wall, in which case they'll die, but they'll have soaked up all the arrows that were meant for your more expensive units. So I treat these guys like actual cannon fodder, though I can find some use for the Corsair Raiders at times, especially getting into the back line and dealing with archers, just because they do have that movement speed buff. And they do actually, like, visually they look pretty solid, but yeah, they're kind of garbage. So, you know, use those guys without much thought into it. So, going into the melee infantry, first off, we will have the Rosodon Halberdiers. Now, these guys, a pretty much standard halberdier unit, 4 attack, 4 charge, 10 total defense. Being halberds, they are good against all types of mounts, so bonus against, especially Amrothian Swan Cavalry. They have a specific bonus against them, along with a bonus against horses and elephants, so do notice there's nothing for wargs or camels with these halberdiers. But they do have that armor piercing, so they still have effectiveness against other units. Other light infantry around their tier will typically beat them out in battle because they have lower defense than a spearman and lower attack than like a regular swordsman unit does. But the fact that they are AP does make them quite useful, especially against many of the heavily armored nations you might go against, such as Gondor, Dol Amroth. If you end up ever going to like fight the dwarves, these guys can be moderately useful, though keep in mind elite units will absolutely crush the Rosodon Halberdiers. Next to them, we have the Rosodon Footmen, trading out the armor piercing for a regular 4 attack, but 15 defense, so 5 more defense. A lot of that is in their shield, so these guys are actually really great at absorbing arrow fire. I mean, look at these shields. These things are as pretty much big as the men are. They are tower shields, so good against enemy archers. They will hold the line very well for you as long as they're not being flanked and they're not being, you know, hit by anything too elite. Obviously, elite Gondorian infantry will probably make short work of these guys, dwarven infantry, that sort of thing. They do have a shield wall, which is nice too, but it's more useful for pushing into an enemy formation than holding a defensive line, The only real defensive utility of a shield wall is to do a spaghetti line to make them more resistant to arrow fire, which actually does work pretty well with the footmen given their high shield bonus. Putting a spaghetti line out in front of your battle line like this and just absorbing arrows with them, they'll survive for a long time, so don't underestimate the defensive utility of a shield wall while under arrow fire, but outside of that, it's better used offensively than defensively. Solid spear unit, really good unit to recruit, especially as you will be going up against a solid amount of cavalry if you go into Gondor, or anywhere else really. Dol Amroth, Swan Knights, I mean, a Swan Knight charge is definitely going to hurt these guys, but there is some actual defensive utility of shield wall against cavalry charges, so put them in shield wall if they're about to be charged, but be wary that they often push into enemy ranks, so it has some drawbacks and some advantages. Next to them, we have the Azrazair Warriors. So these guys use, it's kind of hard to tell because it's so dark, but they actually use two-handed axes with the shield, though do note that shield value actually does not apply for them. I feel it probably should, given the fact that they have it, but maybe it's just a stand-in for their defense skill. It's a pretty small shield, pretty much the same as the Azrazair Warriors in previous renditions. They do frighten nearby enemy infantry, and they are effective against armor. I believe they actually have a higher armor skill than the classic Azrazair did, the basically Corsair Axemen, who may have only had like 0 or 1 armor in 4.6, I believe. So they've gotten a bit of an armor buff, but at the cost of some of their defensive skill. Solid unit, good against armor, so Gondor Infantry, Talon Knights, not so great against cavalry, but if they can avoid being charged and instead kind of support another unit that's fighting cavalry, they might get the odd few kills on the charge, and they do have a 7 charge bonus, so they can do pretty solid at that, though that does wear off very quickly in this game. Next up, behind them, I put the Ar-Adûnaim and Nardu-Zigar. Similar role, twice the melee attack, but without the armor piercing. A bit higher defense, roughly twice the defense, going from 7 to 15. This is where your morale actually starts to get pretty good for your unit. Standard movement speed, good morale, 14 attack, 15 defense, though even though they have a shield, they actually don't have defense against arrows, but they do have 11 armor, so because of that, they are vulnerable to armor-piercing units, armor-piercing archers, and melee units, as they only have 4 defensive skill, so they really rely on the armor to keep them alive. That does mean when they get flanked, they don't suffer as much because the armor keeps them alive. They lose their defensive skill bonus. I think that gets like halved when a unit is attacked in the flank, so they don't suffer too much from being rear charged, but anything armor piercing will do a lot of work to these guys, especially in a head-on-head fight, so do be wary of that. Low defense skill, but very high attack. As long as you keep them away from like macemen and other axemen, they'll do very solid, and they do have, I absolutely love this sword design on these guys. These massive two-handed greatswords, I just think those look really, really good. There is some clipping with the shield when they rest their swords out, but it's not that big of a deal if you can get past it, so I give them a pass on that. I really do like two-handed sword units. I'm kind of biased towards them, so I'm a big fan of the Nardu-Zigar. Next to them, we have the Ar-Adûnaim and Nardu-Terik. So rather than having two-handed swords, these guys have one-handed maces with a higher defense of 19. So you can see it here. They also have a sword equipped, but they don't actually use the sword. It's just the maces here. Good against armor. Now, less attack than the axemen, which makes sense. It's a smaller weapon, but much greater defense. These guys, it's a good idea to get a lot of these if you're going to fight like Gondor or Dol Amroth, just because they can help deal with the infantry. They do keep them away from cavalry. Their only real hope against a cavalry charge is to put them in shield wall. And they actually make very good use of their shield wall, being able to push through enemy formations with the armor-piercing attack. They can actually do some very solid work there. Do note, though, just like the, what was it, the Nardu-Terik, I believe, was that their name? Or the Nardu-Zigar. These are the Nardu-Terik. They have a very low defense skill. They very much rely on their armor and their shield value. They'll suffer a bit more if they're hit in the flank. But, you know, in the front line, they'll do okay. Try to keep them away from other armor-piercing units if you can, though they at least have the shield to keep them going, which is helpful. But they might not cut through a lightly armored unit as much as the Nardu-Zigar will. So behind them, I decided we'd put the Ar-Adûnaim Armsmen, the final unit, in our standard melee infantry tier, 12 attack, 6 charge, 28 total defense. Again, shield wall, so there's a common theme of shield wall with the Ar-Adûnaim, so a lot of their units have that, which is just nice to have that option. A very powerful unit, excellent morale, impetuous morale response, standard movement speed. These guys are absolute murder machines, pretty much equivalent to, I believe, what is it, Citadel Guard that Gondor have, or no, I think it's Wardens of the White Tower, their melee infantry unit. So, same kind of sword design as the, what was the Narduzagar? I get them mixed up all the time. But a smaller one-handed sword. Very good units. Your faction heir actually has this as its bodyguard, so I highly recommend using these guys, especially liberally with your faction heir. Just be wary of cavalry, but again, shield wall will kind of protect you from that. So it's not too big of a deal, and they have a very high armor skill. You know, these guys actually have a defense skill of 8 with 15 armor, so greater armor, but a much greater defense skill than the previous tier. So these guys are dedicated combatants. Before we go to the elites, we'll go to the archers now, starting with the Azrazair crossbowmen. Kind of a standard middle tier crossbow unit, 5 melee, 7 missile attack. Okay accuracy with 26 missiles. Being that they are crossbows, they have a very slow rate of fire, so often in battles you won't even get through all of their bolts before the battle ends, unless it's a very drawn out battle or like a defensive siege, you might be able to get through their ammo. They're great if you can get kind of up close to the enemy and tie them up with another unit, like such as the spearmen. It's a good combo. Have the spears hold the enemy in place and then get to the sides with the crossbowmen and shoot at relatively close to medium range, and you'll see good results from them. They also have the bonus being that they are crossbows, high missile attack with bonus against armor. These guys are actual Swan Knight killers. They are very good against fighting Swan Knights and other heavy cavalry, so long as they don't get charged. I always recommend have a few of these guys just to kill the very heavily armored bodyguards of some of the nations you might be fighting, especially from Gondor and especially from Dol Amroth. It's very nice to have these guys, especially with cavalry bodyguards. Typically, the general of a cavalry bodyguard, like a Swan Knight or a Rohirrim Royal Guard, they might be the last man in their unit and then they'll run away. And it's kind of hard to actually capture them. But if you have some crossbowmen that can unleash, 152 bolts into a general, he's going to die for sure. So great character assassins, these guys, and good at fighting cavalry, but because of their low rate of fire, if they are caught reloading and there's cavalry in front of them and you don't have support, they will take a charge head on. So they can do a good amount of damage output, but they have their own vulnerabilities, mostly being their mobility as a crossbow unit. Next then we have the Rossadon Bowmen, trading the armor piercing and the higher missile attack for a faster rate of fire, more mobile, 333 on their melee stats, 9 total defense. Not amazing, 170 meter range, so they got more range than the Azrazair crossbows. Not super useful up against the Númenórean nations, but they do have much better use up against Harad. Should you fight Harad, Harad doesn't have much armor, so they can be useful there. They're also useful against Dunland and Enedwaith, against their lighter tier units. And to an extent, some of the lighter armed elven archers they can be useful against. But anything heavy armor, they're not going to do too much. The average accuracy does leave quite a bit to be desired from these men. So if you are going into Gondor, I probably wouldn't recommend taking many of them, unless you're trying to counterfire like Gondorian archer militia, or maybe fire at some Lamedon clansmen. They can be okay there, but 3 missile attack doesn't do a whole lot, but they are available at your lower tiers, so they have some use. And of course, it's always good to have archers anyway, so not great against armor, good against light infantry, great against Harad and Khan. They'll excel in those matchups, depending on who you want to fight. So just keep that in mind against who your enemy is, and scout their armies before you make your own armies to counter them. Behind them, we have the Ar-Bisarnum Nardubawib, basically just a upgraded version of the Rossadon Bowman, 665. Higher missile attack with high accuracy, 30 arrows, and 190 meter range. These guys will actually do solid work even against heavier armored units, and especially against lighter armored units. So if you can get the Nardubawib, get them. They also come with just massive longbows. Look at the size of these bows. I really like that. The Ar-Adûnaim, I think, just look absolutely beautiful. So pretty much same thing. Great unit to have. They are a bit more expensive and they come with less men per battalion, but they are quite a bit significantly better. And next to them, well, not necessarily an archer, but a skirmisher, I decided to input the Azrazire Marines. 11 melee attack, so they're good in melee. 8 missile attack, that is effective against mounts and effective against armor. They do come with 3 missiles, so not a whole lot, 60-meter range, but high accuracy. Excellent if you ever have to fight Mumakil. Bring a unit of Azrazire Marines, and you will see the Mummics drop instantly. If you go into late game battles against Mordor, and they are spamming Great Beasts and Trolls, you'll definitely want to have quite a few Azrazire Marines. There is one downside with Javelin units, though, and that is that the enemy, the AI loves to target whatever has the highest missile attack, and oftentimes that will be your Javelin men, and they only have 7 armor to protect them against arrows, so they will typically get shot up. You might be able to protect them against cavalry, but if you don't have the archers shut down, they will focus fire your Azrazire Marines. So keep that in mind, vulnerable to missiles, but very good against elephants and cavalry. That does it for the skirmishing side. I will, before we go into at least go into the trebuchets, I figured, well, I won't go into like the catapults and the ballistas outside of like maybe the dwarven catapults. But being that they are the first Numenorian nation, they are, yeah, granted the trebuchet. I don't believe they did not have the trebuchet in version 4.6. They got added. I think I could be misremembering, but I'm fairly certain I added them to the Ar-Adûnaim and the Northern Dunedain, but it was so long ago, I can't quite remember. I didn't do any of the textures, though. I forget who did the textures, but you do have the trebuchet. It does come with the rotting meat ammo, regular and flaming ammo. Very long range, 320 meters on the standard projectile with 250 meters for the carcass. And better against buildings, 100 attack against buildings, 55 against troops, but anything that actually hits infantry, they'll one-shot anything. Doesn't matter what you are, Sauron, Mumakil, heavy cavalry. If a trebuchet shot manages to hit you, you are absolutely dead. But they are very inaccurate up against infantry, so that is their downside. But they can be very effective, and again, better in siege than in a field battle, but they can have some niche use, and they do look absolutely fantastic. I love the trebuchets. Anyway, we'll go into the elites now. We'll start with the Naru Inaru Household Guard. This is your standard bodyguard with the upgraded visuals. 11 attack, 31 defense. Very solid. I don't believe... They might have shield wall. Actually, no, they don't have shield wall because they're a general's unit. But solid unit. Pretty much next to them are the Royal Guard here. Same thing, just in a much bigger battalion. Same stats. In fact, to the dot outside of the number of men. So Royal Guard, fantastic spearmen with 11 attack. When I think of them, I also think of like the... Ooh, I'm blanking on their names. The Sons of the Fallen, the elite dwarven spears. They're kind of like them. Inspires nearby troops. They also are your sole stake unit, so keep that in mind. They are anti-cavalry and they can lay down your stakes, but they are very limited in recruitment and availability. But again, that's always nice to have, and I believe once the battle starts, you can actually put them into shield wall. So amazing unit if you can get it. They have very high armor, very high defense skill, and very high shield. No real true weaknesses outside of enemy elite infantry with like swords or armor piercing. They can do some work to the Royal Guard. Off to the right of them, we have the Ar-Pharazôn's Faithful, looking absolutely gorgeous in the black and gold trimmed armor. 5 attack is low, but they are a pike unit with 22 defense, excellent morale and good morale response. They contend up there to be one of the top pike units in the game. I might do a comparison on that because I do want to check. Of course, I already know who the winner is going to be. That's going to be the Ar-Adûnaim special pikes that they get. But still a fantastic pike unit, 114 men per battalion. Good against mounts, very long spears. They'll actually do okay against Mumakil if they end up going into fights. I mean, a lot of the men will die, but they will take Mumakil down with them. As long as they aren't too bunched up and as long as they don't all get hit at once by the giant tusks. So very solid pike unit, very limited recruitment, and they require a very, very high culture requirement. If you can get them, recruit them, they will not let you down. Especially because there used to be a time in Divide and Conquer, I want to say version 2.2 and earlier, where there was actually Azrazire pikemen, and I think that was your only pike unit you got. And just like now, you have only one pike unit, but it is one of your most elite units, and very, very late into the game will you actually unlock these due to how hard it is to get your culture back up. I guess you could rush it, but the biggest barrier is going to be, I believe, the 75 or 80% culture requirement of the Ar-Pharazôn Faithful. And then behind them, perhaps my personal favorite cavalry unit in the entire game, Naru and our Royal Knights, with the completely amazing looking plate armor on the horses, the gold trim on the black armor, the very detailed swords for medieval 2 standards, that is. I absolutely love this unit. They do have 10 attack, 8 charge, 26 total defense. They do require certain faction capitals to be occupied in order to recruit them, I believe. Think like Tharbad, I think some of the primary Numenorian settlements. I probably should have checked that before I started the overview video. Just note that you will not get these guys anywhere, and I'm pretty certain they're mostly just in like Numenorian and Dunedain capital cities. But very powerful. Your only actual cavalry unit as the Ar-Adûnaim is you are not a cavalry nation. You are an, I would say, mostly infantry-focused nation. You have very, very powerful human infantry. But you do get the ability to conscript units, and most of the time you will, in fact, all of the time you do get cavalry from your conscription camp. So you do have options depending on where you go. But for the most part, you will only really have the Royal Knights as your own personal cavalry unit. Very solid. They do frighten nearby enemy infantry. Solid charge. They do have a bonus against other horses. So, fantastic unit. I absolutely love these guys. Honestly, if you can get them, then definitely do. In fact, I'm just going to have fun with them here as we begin our battle against the forces of Bree. So next week will be Bree, followed by Dale, and then I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it goes Dorwinion and then Dunland. Dol Amroth in there also, so go Dale, Dol Amroth, Dunland, or no, Dale, Dol Amroth, Dorwinion, Dunland. We have 4 D factions in the game, but they will come after the men of the Breeland, so that'll be again next week. We'll do weekly uploads for the content. Let's just see what happens if we charge headfirst into elite merchant infantry as the catapults fly overhead, hitting our Pharazôn's Faithful. We might have taken some crossbow volleys there. In fact, this is probably one of the worst units to charge them into. Heavily armored merchant infantry. You know, they're not doing too bad. They're trading well. It would be best to pull them out of the fight. Look at the ballista shots coming in. Trebuchet, I'm going to take you off of the AI's command because I don't know what they're doing with you. That as the battle lines meet together. Adversary crossbowmen, my AI control is just absolutely useless. I should have taken control of the faction, but here come the trebuchet volleys, clipping some of the gatekeepers, getting the few kills here. We'll now charge the Bandoberus archers here with the remainder of our Royal Knights going into the hobbits. They have absolutely no chance as they just get cut down by the very, very elite cavalry. We'll go to shut down their ballista crews now as the artillery continues to fight. Merchant infantry from Bree charging into the Azrazire Marines as the Nardu Tarek engage up against Watchmen Axguard. Look at that. Our trebuchet is aiming at the Council's Guard, and they are completely unable to even make contact. Of course, they aren't able to actually hit anyone, though they do take out a few hobbits there, which is nice. Look at that. Just simply charging into the ballista, they are already shaken. We will get those cavalry out of there. Let's run back over here, support our main lines if we can. The Azrazire Marines aren't doing too great. I'm going to start taking control here because our AI ally is not doing that well. I was hoping that I could just sit back, let the AI do most of the fighting while I just have fun with the cavalry. And you know, that is what I will continue to do. We'll charge right into the gatekeepers. Right in behind, that'll take them out. Sure, they have halberds, but they're not too threatening. Take them out, lads. Here, I hear catapult shots. Ooh, a huge volley right into the Greenway Spearmen, making them rout after taking a few more hits. They are out of here. That actually did a lot of damage to them. So that was nice to see. If any other volleys or areas we might want to shoot into, let's shoot into these spearmen. Trebuchet does have one advantage, and that is its very, very high arc of fire. Especially because it's so much taller than any other siege artillery in the game. It can actually do okay at supporting your own infantry. As we can see here, the fear that the Naru Royal Guard Cause is already making these Watchmen Axe Guard flee from the battle. I bet if we rear charge into these merchant infantry, they will follow suit. Come on, Trebuchet, I want to see a volley. There goes the merchant infantry, wrapping up the Brelanders. They didn't stand much of a chance against the elite Numenorians from the Southlands. Look at those ballista or trebuchet shots way up in the back. Merchant militia, you guys had no chance either. Completely run down by the Royal Knights. That's why I love elite cavalry, and yeah, cavalry is very strong. It is medieval too. Cavalry's always just been really good in this engine. They are absurd. Probably the strongest cavalry of any Total War game. Although I think Shogun actually had some powerful cavalry, but most people would use Yari-Ashigaru and Shogun, so cavalry actually isn't that useful. And man, you just gotta love having the artillery flying overhead on the battlefield. That looks so nice. I never use artillery enough, but I do admire the way it looks. The roll of cool is quite impressive. Anyway, we'll let the battle roll out now, and again, I will see all of you guys next week on the next video. And until then, my friends, farewell, and I hope you are enjoying version 5.